What is up, everybody? It's Heretic, and I am back after quite a while being away. Sorry about that. Anyway, I am back with the XY8 Red Flash and Blue Impact, or Blue Shock, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, we're gonna go ahead and take a look at the cards from these two sets now that they have been fully spoiled and presumably released overseas, and of course this will make up the English Breakthrough expansion that will be coming out in early November, with pre-releases likely to be at the backside of October. So anyway, let's get right into it, and we're going to start with Pokemon EX in this set, and you may notice that there are not as many as there have been in recent sets, that being because they're focusing on the new Pokemon Break evolutions as ultra rares as well. So, well, we're going to go ahead and we'll get to those in a moment, but we're going to go ahead and take a look at the EXs in the set. We have 8 of them total. It is 2 and 2 copy on each side of Mega Evolution, so 4 regular EXs, 4 Megas, and we'll go ahead and get right into that. And the first one we are going to look at is Houndoom EX. So we'll get right into that at 170 HP and a Fire type this time, so a little different for Houndoom, who has been on Fire type cards before, but is usually made as a Dark type. But this time they opt to make Houndoom EX and its Mega Evolution Fire types, and the regular Houndoom is actually a pretty interesting card. Its first attack for 1 Fire Energy is Melt Horn, and that discards 2 cards off the top of your opponent's deck. So in a way, it makes it kind of like Bunnelby, the Ancient Trait Bunnelby from Primal Clash. However, you have 2 prizes you give up when it's knocked out, as opposed to only 1 with Bunnelby, but you get 3 times the HP in exchange for that. So, interesting little trade there you got. I mean, you figure if you're comparing Bunnelby's, like, well, you do enough damage to KO 3 of these guys in order to knock Houndoom. But then you have to kind of look at the differences between the 2 cards. And Bunnelby, of course, offering the Rototiller attack as well as its ability to burrow away cards off the top of your opponent's deck, and again, only giving up 1 prize. However, Houndoom does have a second attack, and for 2 Fire Energies, it does Grand Flame, which is, if anyone remembers our old buddy Entei EX from the Dark Explorer set, this is the same attack, just for a lesser energy cost, doing pretty much, I would say, significantly less damage, down from 90 to 50, but still attaching a Fire Energy card from your discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. So, while I don't think we'll see Quad Houndoom the way that Quad Entei was a thing at one point, I definitely do think that this has its uses powering things up, especially early on if you find a way to discard some energy, or late game just to kind of recharge. But I don't expect it to be game-breaking or anything, which is why we have a Mega Evolution. That's the next card we're going to look at, is Mega Houndoom EX, or M Houndoom EX. And so at 210 HP is gotten more normal as more sets have come out with Mega Evolutions. At first it looked a little bit more on the modest side, but ever since Mega Manectric, I think we've realized that 210 HP is not necessarily terrible. And it has an attack for a mere 2 Fire Energies called Inferno Fang, which deals 80 damage and then gives you the option to discard all Fire Energies attached to this Pokemon. And if you do, you deal an additional 80 damage. And right there is one way that the regular Houndoom EX's Grand Flame attack can come in handy to bring energy back. And just the fact that you are able to deal 160 damage. However, if it had been 90 plus 90 or 80 plus 100 or whatever, that probably would have been significantly better given the fact that you could hit the magic 180. So this guy needs a Muscle Band, which means you're either playing Tool Retriever, or if it's expanded format, I guess you could play the Team Plasma Masquerain, or we're ending our turn when we evolve this guy. So, of course, in expanded, you also have Tool Scrapper to work with, but since cities appear to be on track to be standard format, unless something else gets announced, then we're looking at a format where we do not have Masquerain or Tool Scrapper as an option, which leaves manual Mega Evolution without the Spirit Link and Tool Retriever. But that said, if you can get the Muscle Band on here, you will be hitting 180 damage for 2 energies. Granted, you'll have to discard them. There are plenty of ways to get them back. So, definitely not a terrible option here. It's actually a pretty solid attacker. And the next Mega Evolution we are going to look at is Glalie. Glalie EX. Again, 170 HP, and for one for one water energy, it flips a coin, no damage, but if heads, your opponent's active Pokemon becomes paralyzed, so best status condition in the game. Granted, no damage, but still pretty useful. And then for an additional 2 colorless, so 3 energy total, Glalie can deal 50 plus damage with instant cooling, and the condition is that if you have the same number of cards in your hand as your opponent, this attack will do 100 more damage, equaling out 150. Once again, you attach the muscle band here, and you don't even have to go to the Mega, and you can be hitting for 170 damage pretty easily. The condition here of meeting same number of cards in your hand as your opponent may seem like a bit of a stretch, but more often than not, this will not be as difficult as you might think, especially with the Judge supporter returning in this set. So that will definitely make things just a little more interesting, and honestly, I feel this is a pretty powerful card. And then we get to Mega Glalie EX, which has 220 HP, so a pretty bulky body on this one. And for 1 water and 2 colorless, it does Cryo Mouth, which does 100 damage, so not too great, especially for a Mega, but if this Pokemon has 10 or more damage counters on it, this attack does 150 more damage, so that is 250 damage for a water and 2 colorless. Granted, it probably will get knocked out immediately afterward, but that is a ton of damage, and you can take anything off the board that you wish with that attack, given that situation. This is definitely going to be a bit more difficult and more situational to work with than regular Glalie EX hitting instant cooling for 150, and thus probably not as playable, but in the situation where you have a 220 HP body and you need roughly half your HP taken in order to be able to pull that off, but if you can do that, you can turn this thing into a gigantic wrecking ball, and a card that definitely takes some work, but can turn into quite the monster attacker given the proper situation. So I gotta say I like that. And next we are going to look at the Mighty Mewtwo EX. Unfortunately, no, this one does not have X-Ball. That's why we got the Lugia EX from the last set, ladies and gentlemen. So the first Mewtwo EX, because there are 2 of them in this set, that we are going to go ahead and take a look at is 170 HP, which I'm pretty sure is the total for both of them. For 1 Psychic Energy, this Pokemon does 30 times damage with Blast Ball, and this attack, I guess, does its best to impersonate X-Ball, dealing 30 damage times the number of Psychic Energy attached to this Pokemon. Now, unfortunately, the Gardevoir that doubles up our Psychic Energies from Next Destinies and Dark Explorers is long since rotated out of Standard format, so we don't have that as an advantage. But then again, if we could play all those sets, you're probably playing the old Mewtwo EX. So there's not really much else to say about this other than you could try to load it with a bunch of Psychic Energies and deal a bunch of damage, but you're probably better off using Aero Ball or even Yveltal EX and Evil Ball if you want to accomplish that. The second attack is actually rather interesting. For 2 Psychic and a Colorless, it allows you to switch the number of damage counters on this Pokemon with the damage counters on your opponent's active Pokemon. So if you take a bunch of damage, then you can just say, hey, I'm just going to go ahead, Dimension Valley, 2 Psychic Energies now instead of 1, and I'm going to move all my damage over to you. And so that would in essence allow you to kind of pseudo-double Psychic Energy to make that play. Definitely not a bad option. So we'll go ahead and skip to the second Mewtwo EX now in the set, and then we'll get into the Megas. This one, for 2 colorless, deals 30 damage with an attack called Photon Wave, and then during your opponent's next turn, any damage done to this Pokemon by attacks is reduced by 30 damage. So, I guess between the 2 regular Mewtwo EXs, if you're looking to run Mega Mewtwo, the selection really is going to come down to depend on, are you actually running Psychic Energy cards in the deck? If you are, probably go with the first one. If not, you might as well play this one, so you have an attack off a double colorless energy or 2 other basic energy cards, as opposed to not having one at all. We also get a Psycho Burn or Psy Burn for 2 Psychic and 2 colorless, dealing a vanilla 120 damage. I don't think many people are really going to care for that. So if we're running, well, I guess it depends on which way we plan on Mega Evolving to if there's even a chance we will have that energy cost attached. And then we will go get into Mega Mewtwo EX, and so we'll start with Mega Mewtwo X, which this is the bigger, badder version of the two Mewtwo's. However, that does not necessarily make it the better version. And you can see why real quickly, because while we have a massive 230 HP and an attack that hits 150 plus damage, if you take a second to observe that attack's energy cost of 1 Psychic, 2 Fighting, and 1 Colorless Energy to deal the 150 plus damage, you might realize that is going a little overboard. However, the attack can be a lot more devastating than you might think. For that amount, for that 4 energy cost, Vanishing Strike, or Vanishing Strike if you're looking at the full art, because they misprinted it. There you go. If there is a Stadium card in play on either side, this attack's damage is increased by an additional 50 up to 200. And on top of that, this attack's damage is not affected by resistance or any other effects on the defending Pokemon, but only by weakness. So very much like Genesect EX's attachment G-Booster card, only without the discard, instead just having a much more ridiculous energy requirement. And this is one of those cards that we want Golduck Break for, I think, in order to be able to play it, or just find some way to make this work, since they did leave it as a Psychic type instead of making it Fighting type, due to the fact that this particular Mega Mewtwo in the video games is also half Fighting. But in any case, if you can get that attack powered up, this thing can become a giant monster of a wrecking ball, but getting it there just might prove to be a little too much. And then the other Mega Mewtwo that we are looking at here is probably the one that everybody is more excited for, and that is Mega Mewtwo with letter Y. And with 210 HP, 20 less, and 1 less retreat on its retreat cost, the big difference here, as everyone would expect, is the attack. And this one, for 2 colorless energy, deals 10 damage plus 30 more damage for each energy attached to both players' active Pokemon. So, like a gigantic version of X-Ball or Evil Ball even, seeing as to how you start with 10 less than Evil Ball, but you deal 30 for each energy instead of 20. So, with its own 3 energies alone, it is dealing, or 2 energies, sorry, it is dealing 70 damage, which is already more than Yveltal would deal in that situation, and then it only goes up from there. Of course, you can also use Dimension Valley to drop the energy cost and make it even more accessible. This attack being not affected by weakness, of course, to kind of curb the fact that, hey, you know what, Mewtwo Wars were a problem, they were weak to themselves, let's do something about that. And then, of course, just the fact that it really can get ridiculous. So while you look at this Mewtwo's attack being a lot more powerful, but not being affected by weakness, we look at the other one, which just has the raw damage output, and is not affected by resistance or other effects. So in a way, they're kind of like yin and yang to each other, I guess. But anyway, that is Mega Mewtwo EXY, and those are our 4 EXs and their 4 Mega Evolution forms. Of course, you can mix and match the regular Mewtwo's with the Mega Mewtwo's, as one would expect. All of these Mega Evolutions also have Spirit Links in the set, so plenty of ways to play them. So anyway, next we will get onto our Break Evolutions and the rest of our Ultra Rares, which, of course, people are going to want to know what these do, since they're the cards, they're seen as money cards throughout the sets. So we'll start with Chestnut Break, and from what we know right now, it looks like Break Evolutions are considered just like a Stage 2 or even a Stage 3, if you're going, like in the case of Chestnut, where you're going over top of a Stage 2, as opposed to being more like a Level X. However, they do carry Level X kind of conditions and traits when it comes to this. And so Chestnut Break becomes the largest one-prize Pokemon currently in the format, at least in standard format, with a massive 190 HP. But having to evolve up into a Stage 2 and then again on top of that could definitely prove a bit too difficult in my eyes. However, Break Evolutions retain the attacks, abilities, weakness, resistance, and retreat costs of their previous evolutions. So definitely something to look forward to there, as if your lower forms do have better attacks or abilities or anything, then you get to choose which Chestnut you want this thing to take on the abilities of. And in that case, I believe it is going to be Chestnut from X and Y as opposed to the new one we got this set. And of course, Chestnut Break gives this thing an additional attack as well for 2 grass and 2 colorless. Tough Hammer deals 160 damage, so again, put the Muscle Band, you hit 180. It's a bit of a magic number in this game when it comes to EXs. And you deal 30 damage of recoil and then 30 additional damage to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. And of course, not applying weakness and resistance on the bench, as is pretty much always the case, unless we're wide lensing or something. And the next card we will look at is Marowak Break. And so the Marowak that comes with this has the first attack for 1 fighting energy, dealing 30 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon of your choice. Again, no weakness, no resistance on the bench. And then for a fighting and a colorless, you deal Bone Windmill for 60. And if your opponent's active Pokemon is an EX, then Marowak will jump back to the bench in exchange for a different Pokemon. Basically like Donphan has been doing for so long now. And then Marowak's Break Evolution gives it a grand total of 140 HP. And an additional attack called Bone Revenge for 1 fighting and 1 colorless, dealing 20 damage plus 40 more damage for each prize card your opponent has taken. So, while it doesn't do much early game, late game this could be pretty devastating once 4 or so prize cards have been taken and you are hitting again 180 damage. However, at 140 HP, it remains to be seen if this thing can survive to use its attack twice. Of course, you also have strong energy to be able to boost that outcome even higher. And that is Marowak Break. The next one we're going to look at is Zoroark Break, and he has been given a pretty darn good new Zoroark card to work with, so we'll touch base on that real quick. The new Zoroark from Breakthrough, or XY8, has an ability called Impersonate, which you may recognize once during your turn before your attack. If this Pokemon is on your bench, you may switch it with your active Pokemon. This is exactly what Keldeo EX did, really, just with a different name, and that is Rush In, or Fossil Dragonite having Step In. They just changed the name to work with Zoroark's ability to disguise itself in the video games. So, but once again, Impersonate is exactly what Keldeo EX has been doing, and doing very well. Of course, you're on a Stage 1 now. However, you got the 1 prize thing going for you. And it also has a pretty solid attack. Mind Jack, an attack we first saw on the Plasma Absol, this time for 2 colorless energies, dealing 10 damage plus 30 more damage for each Pokemon on your opponent's bench. And against Skyfield decks, that is a lot. In case you guys didn't realize that right away, but I'm going to imagine most of you guys did. And then Zoroark Break brings his HP from 100 up to 140, and gains an additional attack, Foul Play, for 1 Darkness Energy, allowing you to choose one of your opponent's active Pokemon's attacks and use it as this attack, for this exact cost of 1 Darkness Energy. So, while I think more people will probably just run Zoroark for its ability to impersonate and then have a colorless attack that can deal a lot of damage against a lot of decks, Zoroark Break will probably hang around once or twice for darkness-based decks, as it will be able to use a pretty solid attack of its own, or an attack of your opponent's. So that is Zoroark Break, also in my opinion the coolest looking Break evolution on a card. And then our final Break evolution from the original core set in Japan, which, note, we will have a total of 6 of them in the US, and I will touch base on those last 2. This one is Florges and Florges Break. And I think the reason, again, regular Florges here is probably the better card. With its ability Relaxing Scent, this allows each of your Pokemon that require Fairy-type energies in their attacks, be them Fairy-type Pokemon themselves, or the Goodra line, which also uses Fairy energy. And all your Pokemon's attacks cost 1 Fairy energy less. And so, something like Florges EX, or Xerneas EX, or I guess you probably don't want to use Mega Gardevoir given how its attack works, but the rest of that stuff, just being able to attack for 1 less energy, seems pretty good. I mean, Florges getting to deal Bright Garden for 1 energy, or Xerneas being able to hit Breakthrough for 2 energies, or a double colorless really, or a 3 energy X-Blast, really not too bad. And then Florges Break does not gain an extra attack, but would become a Pokemon with 2 abilities in this case. And Florges Break's ability allows you to, once per turn, heal 30 damage from your active Pokemon and also cure 1 special condition from it. So, again, not too shabby, but probably not that great. And that is Raichu. But Raichu Break, and so the new Raichu in the set that goes with it, for 1 lightning and 1 colorless, deals 50 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon EX. So, spread attacker, but not too bad if you're going against all EX based decks, which there are plenty of them in format. So, interesting attack there. And honestly, not terrible. And then for an additional colorless, you deal 70 plus if you flip a coin and heads, and you flip heads, then 20 more damage. Not too much there. Some players, I think, may choose to just run the XY version of Raichu with Circle Circuit over this one, and I can't really say I blame you if you do. And then with Raichu Break, your HP goes up to 130, and you get an attack called Grand Bolt for 1 lightning and 2 colorless, dealing 170 and discarding all of its energy. So, and while discarding all your energy might seem like a lot, that 170 damage is definitely it's quite a number. Potentially up to 190 with Muscle Band, or 200 in expanded format with Silver Bangle. So, nothing to really scoff at there if you manage to be able to get that attack off and use it. And if you're not knocked out after doing this, a double colorless would give you Circle Circuit once again. However, Circle Circuit can hit that 170 already, or pretty darn close to it. So, really becomes, do you want to do that? You know, do you want to play the Skyfield and devote your setup there, or do you just want to try to use Grand Bolt? I'm still thinking Skyfield. And then our final break evolution is Noivern. And the new Noivern card we got to go with it, for 1 colorless, allows you to shuffle your hand into your deck and then draw a number of cards equal to the number of cards in your opponent's hand, like an old supporter we had called Copycat. And then for a Psychic, a Dark, and a colorless energy, this guy deals 120 damage and discards an energy attached to himself. There is an older Noivern card. It has an ability which a coin is flipped, and if it's heads, the attack does no damage to Noivern, which would be pretty nice on a break evolution to be able to carry that through. It also has an attack for the same energy cost of a Psychic, a Dark, and a Colorless, and deals 30 damage to each Pokemon your opponent has in play. While it's not the greatest attack, it definitely works well with the ability it has, and also would get the Synchro Woofer attack on Noivern Break, which brings its HP up to 130, and for that Psychic, Dark, and Colorless cost, once again, dealing 70 damage, plus if you have the same number of cards in your hand as your opponent does, 80 more damage is added onto this, so once again, hitting up that big 150, that Muscle Band away from taking a lot of EXs down in a single attack, and noticing that is a bit of a common theme here as well within the set, hitting 150 and 160 for damage count, or output. So, again, you know, a pretty solid attacker, but the set's got quite a few of those in terms of that, so you're probably just better off with Glalie EX, I would have to say. And just a couple of cards here real quick we're going to look at. Empoleon, really just going to look at this one for its ability, which allows your basic Pokemon to deal 20 more damage while this is in play. If you can manage to Archie this out, or maybe manage to put a couple of these on the bench, whether it's through Archie or Evolution, you could be dealing quite a bit of damage for low energy costs. Miltank definitely likes this, as powerful friends would be able to deal now more than 80 damage, but you figure a Muscle Band, 1 or 2 Empoleons, and we're hitting somewhere up around 120 to 140, and that's a lot of damage. Magnezone, next one, really just looks like Blastoise or Emboar from the Black and White arc, as it allows you to, through its ability, as often as you like during your turn, you can attach a lightning energy from your hand to one of your Pokemon in play. And to go with it, we get even a Keldeo-esque Pokemon in the form of Raikou, who has an attack that deals 50 damage for 3 colorless, plus 20 more damage for each lightning energy attached to it. And it also has an ability which says that if this Pokemon has any lightning energy attached to it, any attack damage it takes is reduced by 20. So, an interesting little concept there. Next card is Gallade, and it's a fighting type Gallade this time, which has an ability called Premonition, allowing you to look at the top 5 cards of your deck once per turn and put them back in anywhere you like. And kind of bringing back the idea of the Pokedex card that we have not had since Black and White rotated out. And then for 2 colorless, it deals 60 damage, plus if you played a supporter from your hand this turn, an additional 70 damage, so 130 for 2 fighting. Not a bad attack, however, we are looking at a stage 2, so Really have to debate whether or not that's worth it. Granted, the colorless aspect does allow it to attack with whatever energy you have. The next card is Yveltal, and a new baby Yveltal with definitely not as useful as having Oblivion Wing, but while this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, its Fright Night ability keeps all Pokemon tools from having any effect, so while that won't sadly counter your opponent's Head Ringers, seeing as to how Yveltal has to be active, it will counter the effects of cards like Spirit Link, Muscle Band, Hard Charm, so on and so forth, and then for a dark and 2 colorless, it deals 60 damage plus an additional 60 damage to an opponent's benched EX Pokemon. Next card we're going to look at just real quickly is a Bronzor. I don't really care even about this attack, although it goes up to 70 damage if your opponent's down to 1 prize, but this won't be too tough for them to kill. We're mainly looking at this because it has 10 more HP than the Bronzor that is currently played in standard format from Phantom Forces, which only has 50. In Expanded, you're playing the next Destinies ones. Next card is Mr. Mime, which is basically a reprint of the one from Plasma Freeze with Bench Barrier, however, little lesser on the attack, and it is a fairy type. Next card is Dodrio, which has the ability Retreat Aid, calling all the way back to its jungle counterpart and then to the Heart Gold Soul Silver arc, which more than a few cards have done in this set and will continue to do. When this Pokemon is on your bench, your active Pokemon's retreat cost is 2 energy less. That's pretty potent if you ask me. It turns a lot of things that have 2 retreat in the game right now, which very common retreat cost, into 0 retreaters. And if it has more than that, then you're able to Heavy Ball for it, which also sees a reprint in this set. Next card to look at is Typhlosion, and for 1 fire energy, we're going to look at our reason for looking at this right away. Discard the top 5 cards of your deck, and this attack does 80 damage times the number of energy cards you discarded. So in a deck like this, we'd be running a bit more energy than you might think. If you hit 2, you've got your 160 again, so Muscle Band, whatever. If you hit 3, you've knocked them out. Congratulations, that's 240 damage. Any more than that, and I think we're going into overkill. Next card is Octillery, whose ability Abyss Hand allows you to, once per turn, draw cards until you have 5 cards in your hand from your deck, and yeah, I can't really argue with that. 1 card more than the Electrode from Plasma Freeze gave us, off Magnetic Draw. Still not quite the 6 we get from Shaman, though, so whether or not this actually sees play, I don't know. Maybe in decks where people don't want to play Shamans because they don't have them, or they don't want them to sit on their bench. That's about what I'm coming up with here. The next card we're going to look at is actually one of my favorite cards in the set, and that may seem unusual since I'm such an aggressive player, but this thing does what I love to do, and that is knock things out. For 1 Psychic and 1 colorless energy, it does Creep Show, which is kind of a wonky name, but if your opponent's active Pokemon has at least 3 damage counters on it, it is instantly knocked out. And this immediately brings to mind, not only to me, but I think to a lot of people, the option of a deck that runs 2 Stage 2 lines, being Gengar, obviously, and then the Crobat line from Phantom Forces, as Golbat places 20 damage, or 2 damage counters on something when it comes into play, but Crobat on its own places 3 damage counters, and then has an attack that can also snipe anywhere for 30 damage. So pretty solid numbers going on there when it comes to Gengar's attack. Of course, we are talking about 2 Stage 2 lines and a bit of setup, but you can pretty much just Lysander something up and take whatever you want and just knock it out. So I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a fan of this one. And with Dimension Valley, that attack only needs 1 Psychic energy, and your Crobats don't need any energy to attack. So even more efficient, not really needing much energy in a deck like this, just automatic knockouts. What's not to love? We've got 1 more Pokemon here to look at, and that's Hoot Hoot. And some people were crying foul when they saw this. Personally, I like this card, even though I don't like lock decks or concepts, because I believe this is the way that Seismitoad EX should have been made if they weren't going to give it a water energy in its attack cost. 2 colorless, your opponent cannot play any item cards from his or her hand during his or her next turn. However, we are dealing no damage. So you get the lock, much like Fossil Psyduck did with Headache, but you do not get the damage. So therefore we can't beef it up, and in standard format there is also no laser Verbank, so really just an early game stall out until you have a setup. I don't have a problem with that. It's not going to control the entire game. You're not going to go all game with no items unless someone finds a way to build a mill deck out of this. Lastly, we're going to look at some trainer cards. First one on our list right here is Assault Vest, and this is a Pokemon tool card, which if it is attached to one of your Pokemon and that Pokemon takes damage from an opponent's Pokemon that has any special energy cards attached to them, that attack does 40 less damage, so definitely a pretty substantial amount right there. Of course, Aegislash-EX just says, hey, I take no damage already, so, you know, kind of just the rest of you guys that need that card go screw off, but honestly, I feel like this is a pretty powerful card to have. Next, we're going to look at a new supporter card, which is Giovanni's Plans. And this is one of 2 new supporter cards in the set, and both of them have this neat little concept where they have 2 effects, and you get to choose which one you want to apply. The first effect allows you to draw until you have 5 cards in your hand, which, when you think about cards like Shaman, or in expanded expanded format, we have Bianca. Other cards that let us draw, like, I don't know, I mean, Battle Reporter is kind of questionable, but given the synergy or the necessity to have equal numbers of cards in your hand as your opponent with a few cards this set, that might actually pick up a little bit. Overall, its draw ability is not great, but given that you also have the option to, until the end of your turn, each of your Pokemon's attacks deal 20 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon before applying weakness and resistance. So you get 2 completely different options as far as what you want this thing to do. And to me, that alone makes it at least not a bad card. I do not believe it is the better of the 2 supporters, but I definitely believe it's worth a look. The other supporter I was referring to is Bridget, and she is a new supporter card that is really a lot like Pokemon Collector. And she allows you to search your deck for either 1 basic Pokemon EX, no Megas, but the basics, or 3 non-EX basic Pokemon. And then in either case, you put them directly onto your bench as opposed to into your hand, but that's not too bad. And I definitely think that decks like the aforementioned Gengar Crobat idea I brought up could definitely take advantage of this to pull, you know, maybe a couple Zubats and a Ghastly out right away, depending on what you have in your hand. Of course, we also have Level Ball to search the lower forms and stuff like Pokemon Fan Club. So basically, which deck you're playing really, I think, is going to dictate whether you play this or Fan Club. Fan Club definitely the better choice in all-out EX decks, or Winona if you can use it, but in non-EX and evolution decks, you're probably going to go with Bridget and pull a bunch of your basics out right away. So that just seems pretty good to me. And then another new concept that we've got in the set is a double-sided stadium card called Parallel City, so definitely focusing on the yin and yang here once again, as you can place this card right side up or upside down, and which way you place it implies which effect applies to each player. One of the effects on the top of the card, that player can only have 3 benched Pokemon, which is a really polarizing idea compared to Skyfield and can be absolutely devastating if timed at in the right time, especially against Skyfield decks. The other effect, which is the one I think a lot of players will designate to themselves, implies that the player on that side of the field's fire, water, and grass Pokemon's attacks do 20 less damage. So if you're using something other than those 3 types, definitely a very, very potent card there. And of course, being able to lock down and limit bench space is always powerful, and definitely putting a damper on Mega Rayquaza, which can make some other cards very interesting, even Mega Mewtwo in this case. That is Parallel City. Is a very confusing card at first, but basically, depending on which way you place it, you either your Fire, Water, and Grass Pokemon deal 20 less damage, or you can only have 3 bench Pokemon. Whichever effect applies to you, the other one applies to your opponent. But I'm liking the idea that most of us are going to make our opponents only be able to have 3 bench Pokemon. And then a couple more trainer cards we have. Friendly Rescue. Both players choose 1 Pokemon in their discard pile and put it in their hand. Your opponent picks first, so you can kind of counter their choice if necessary. Not sure how big I am on this one, but, you know, it might prove to be useful, I guess, instead of Revive if we're trying to get some evolutions here back. And then the other card is Reserve Ticket, and granted it's a coin flip, I do like this one, which allows you to flip a coin if heads, search your deck for any card, and then shuffle the deck and put the chosen card on top. Like a watered-down coin-flipping version of Computer Search, but not bad. You know what? I'm not going to complain about this. This, in a way, reminds me of Victory Medal. So I'll go ahead and I'll take that one. And then we have 6 notable trainer card reprints in this set. The first 4, the item cards, have all been in play within the Black and White arc, and a Heavy Ball, searching your deck for a Pokemon with 3 or higher retreat costs. Expanded Metal decks love this especially because they have a Bronzor line that is all 3 retreat, as well as the Klinklang line for those who wish to play it. Registeel and Aegislash-EX also have 3 and 4 retreat costs, so take advantage of that while you got it. The next one is Floatstone, which is everyone's favorite Pokemon tool that is not named Muscle Band. Simply put, because, like we did with Keldeo for so long, we are going to slap this thing on a Zoroark and be able to impersonate and free retreat to bring out whatever we want, cure status conditions, get a free retreat every turn. No Lysander stalling, no sleep stalling, no paralysis stalling, just get out of the active and bring up whatever we want. The third card is Town Map, which just flips all your prize cards face up. I played that in my Blastoise deck. For those of you guys who remember my Archie's Blastoise list that I initially came up with back around just before States. So there's that one, and then the final card, which another card like Heavy Ball that has been out of standard format for more than just a little while, and that is Super Odd, allowing you to shuffle up to 3, or I don't think it's up to 3, it has to be 3 unless you don't have that many Pokemon and basic energy cards. So basic Pokemon evolution cards, etc., and basic energies back into your deck from the discard pile. A card that a deck like Virizion Genesect always loved to have, and really not a bad re-addition to the format. This is another one that I feel should have gotten a sooner reprint, I think. And then the last two are supporter cards from the Heart Gold Soul Silver era. The first one is Judge, as I've mentioned already a couple times in this video. Both players shuffle their hands back into their deck and draw 4 cards. With N being gone and Ace Trainer being a bit lackluster, I'm pretty content with this card coming back. Much rather Judge than N, seeing as to how, while a turn 1 Judge when going first can really be a lot more powerful than people might realize, being able to drop your opponent immediately down to 4 cards, I also feel like it can only drop your opponent down to 4 cards. Meaning that neither player will ever be dropped to 1 or 2 as you would have been with an N late game, and I think we've all won and lost games because of an N. An N to 1 or an N to 2. Ugh. Glad that's gone. And then the other one is Fisherman, which allows you to add up to 4 basic energy cards from your discard pile right back to your hand. It's like a supporter version of Superior Energy Retrieval, just without the discard, but I guess the supporter fact is what they use to kind of balance that out. Personally, I still think Superior Energy Retrieval is more powerful. And then the very last card we're going to look at is Burning Energy. The only new special energy card in the set is a special Fire Energy, which when it is discarded through the attack of a Fire-type Pokemon, which is all it can be attached to, then it immediately reattaches itself to that Pokemon as if it were not discarded. So Mega Houndoom likes this card. That's kind of the way I'm looking at Mega Houndoom with that attack. You get a couple of these on there, and you can discard them for its Inferno Fang attack, deal the 160, and just reattach them. Yeah, I guess fire Pokemon are known a bit for discarding energy to deal higher damage attacks, and that's precisely what this thing does. It's counteract that. So that is the entire set as we see it of Blue Impact and Red Flash XY8, also known as Breakthrough here in the United States, and we'll have it in the States here on November 4th. Pre-release is the 2 weekends immediately before that, but it's out in Japan now, so go enjoy. I know I'll be playtesting a few things, but that's what I got for you guys right now, and I hope to see you soon. Cheers.